all that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. Greetings, Poe fans. The Poetastic 2 are back for another episode. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I am Jeanie Smith.
And we welcome you to Surrealism. Are we here or are we not?
That is the ultimate question.
Yes.
Some days I have no idea.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to kind of start out kind of like we always do in the fashion of explaining what is surrealism.
Exactly.
And then we'll go on to many more things. But the question you need to think about this whole episode is, are we really here?
Yes. Are you here? What am I thinking? Am I or am I not?
That is
the question.
Yes, that is the question. Not Shakespeare, but yes.
Yes, that's it. So yes, we're going to start as we always do. It's the teachers in us. We have to plan out. We have to build on each other. So we're going to start with what the definition of surrealism is.
Yes.
And according to dictionary.com, one of my favorites, a 20th century avant-garde movement in art and literature which sought to release the creative potential of the unconscious mind, for example, by the rational juxtaposition of images. And who does that bring to mind? Of course, if you've ever studied any type of art, he is the very first artist to pop into anyone's head when you say the word surrealism. That would be
Salvador Dali.
That's the man, the myth, the legend.
Yes.
So yes, definitely that's the artistic movement that we are going to talk about, but we're going to talk about the history of, yes, it was a 20th century movement.
Wasn't it started 1924? Was that right?
1924 is when Andre Breton was known as the Pope of Surrealism. The Pope. I don't know why they call him the Pope of Surrealism. I guess it was because it was a religion type thing.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating.
It was interesting. Yeah. He was the first one that wrote about the artistry, not just physically in what we see, but in literature. About what surrealism truly was. And if you think about it, in the times of the early 1900s, that's when we had the good old psychoanalysis going on of Mr. Sigmund Freud.
Yes, the id, the ego.
And the superego.
Yes. It'd be interesting to see how Freud would have categorized Poe.
Yeah, I'm curious about how Freud categorized anybody.
That's true. That is very true.
That it's a philosophical debate. I mean, because you have to think out, we got Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yes.
You know, the
and
whole
Jung.
Philosophicals, the Jung, Carl Jung. You had, I just blanked on one of my favorite philosophers. It was not Nietzsche, but who was the other one?
I can't think off the top of my head.
Oh, Immanuel Kant.
Oh, yes. Okay.
That's the other one.
Yes.
He's one of my top notch there. But yes.
Absolutely.
It was definitely a societal shift, because if you think about it, in the early 1800s when Poe was around, you had the Enlightenment era going on, or the Second Great Awakening.
Yes.
Because it was crossing religion with science around Poe's time of the years, where people were accepting that, yes, science never actually took the place of religion, but religion and science could coexist.
Right. And then really adding in the surrealism movement with the whole political kind of part of it, it adds that art into the mixture of the science and the religion too. Yeah,
and that was an industrial revolution going on too. So you had the mechanics, the knowledge, all the things, because we take in Tesla, Edison, all those that were becoming very popular, bringing in the industrial parts of it.
Yes.
You know, now talking to someone across the pond, per se, was no longer an imaginative point of view.
Right.
It was something that was actually starting to happen.
Yeah.
So I think surrealism was taking on the realism, and so they had to come up with something new for surrealism.
Yes. And I think we both read the same article about kind of the introduction to surrealism, and there were a few, not several, but a few people who were kind of considered some of the like either precursors to surrealism or who kind of helped kind of branch out and think about or kind of start these processes of what became surrealism, and Poe was definitely one of them.
Yes, and that was the thing. The article that we found is actually from an archivist at the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. She curated, her name was Kirsty Meehan.
Mm-hmm.
My apologies if I'm butchering that Scottish name. If it's not Scottish, I'm sorry.
Yes.
But she curated a display in 2015 entitled Surreal Roots from William Blake to Andre Breton.
Okay.
And so her blog was talking about the occupation during the Keller Library of these displays.
Okay.
And it's she starts off, when you think of surrealism, do you picture Marguerite's bowler-hatted men or Salvador Dali's dripping clocks? Well, like I said, I always go to Dali.
I do too.
Those clocks are always on the forefront of my mind.
Me too. And one of my bucket list things places is going to Tampa, because there is a art museum dedicated to all of his work, and I'm very anxious to go see that.
Oh yeah, that's on my top to do also. And that she even quotes that Andre Breton, the one I was talking about earlier, called the Pope of Surrealism. He was the trailblazer because his first manifesto of Surrealism came out in 1924.
Okay.
That lists some of the figures whose work influenced the actual movement. Now, most of us, we already talked about, we thought about Sigmund Freud, we talked about Salvador Dali. He actually says that no, it was people like Victor Hugo from 1802 to 1885, Edgar Allan Poe, 1809 to 1849, Charles Baudelaire, 1821 to 1867, and Arthur Rimbaud, 1854 to 1891. He identified these as the forerunners for the way to surrealism in the earlier years, because they were a group that had freewheeling, provocative, boundary-pushing ideas. And that was the whole issue when it came to surrealism, in my opinion.
Yes.
That is the sheer definition of it.
I totally agree. And, something just kind of thinking about, I didn't think about this earlier, but with 1924 being the year that, he kind of started this, that was right at the beginnings of Prohibition. I wonder if that had anything to do with it.
Probably, because, speakeasies were extremely popular. Organized crime was making a wave.
Yes.
A lot of the bootlegging was going on. So people were...
And film was, new and advanced.
Yes, it wasn't just silent anymore. They were starting to make the film noirs that, the moving pictures.
1928 or 29 was the first talkie, I believe.
Yes, it wasn't that long after that.
Yeah.
So you could see where the radio was becoming popular.
Yes.
That was another thing we talked about last week.
Yes.
When we were discussing Orson Welles and his rendition of War of the Worlds that caused great panic.
Exactly.
So there was a lot of going-ons and a lot of historical aspects, both when you think about these earlier Victor Hugo, Edgar Allan Poe, the Second Great Awakening, the Enlightenment period was going on. We were at a war with Mexico.
Yes.
We were expanding. The Manifest Destiny was put into place. And so there was a lot of stuff happening at that time. So it's very surreal to them, the things they were coming up with, because it was just fantasy.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
Victor Hugo, he's the one that wrote 80 Days Around the World, right?
Verne. That was Verne.
Oh, that was Verne.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hugo was I believe, wasn't that Phantom of the Opera?
Yes. Okay.
I'm going to double check us.
It's been a while since I've read anything with Hugo. Guess we should have checked that fact.
That's okay. We'll check it while we're talking.
Exactly. That's the way we work.
And let's see.
Because this is about Poe, so that we concentrate on Poe.
Exactly. We always come back. Yes, Hunchback of Notre Dame and Les Miserables, which totally with, thinking about some of the things we were talking about with, survival and things like that with Les Miserables and the French Revolution.
Oh, yes, definitely. And then with Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, I mean, that in itself is a very popular idea. I mean, Disney made
Oh,
a
yes,
movie.
exactly.
Made a movie, and that was, and just
And Dali
the
worked with
acceptance.
Disney, too.
Yes, Dali. Comes back to Dali.
Yes.
Gotta love the Dali.
Oh, yes.
So, but these are just some ideas that literature is an art form in itself.
Absolutely.
But most of us, when we refer to art, most people think of visual.
Yes, and paintings, I think, are what most people think of when you think of art. But there's so many other depths and ideas that come out of it with sculptures and charcoal and, pencil drawings, watercolors. Now you've got the graphic art as well.
I mean, graphic novels are making a huge impact
Mm-hmm.
into
Absolutely.
today, and it's pretty much drawing a lot of the readers back into reading.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Because
had
it's
to
a form
figure
of
out-
reading.
Yes, and it's also an art form, which is great in itself.
Yes.
But at the same time, we can go farther back into history in the art of surrealism, even way back into the days of the Greeks and the Romans,
Absolutely.
because they were building these mythological ideas and these creatures that were, to those people in that time period, realistic in some areas,
Yes.
but surrealistic because they were the epitome of perfection.
Yes, and there's so many things that have hidden meanings behind all of those heroines, heroes, characters, monsters, and everything else that in literature, as we know, many stories have those behind the scenes connections as well.
Yeah, the Greek tragedy. I mean, just think of the Oedipus complex.
You're bringing Freud back in.
Yes, exactly. I mean, he went back to the old.
He did,
and
yes.
he brought it to the new by looking at the Oedipus complex as that tragedy that happened where it was based on the idea that the son was going to, kill the father. So he made him disappear. But he didn't. It was like, and to me, it was based on a lot of the story of Moses.
I could see that, definitely.
Because, putting Moses in a basket down the river and everything, and then Oedipus was the same way. The mother couldn't bring herself to kill him, so she put him in the river and pushed him down. He was raised, and then it goes a little psycho weird after that. But
well, and I think a lot of stories come from a retelling of the Greek and Roman myths and other myths from even Egypt and Norse and those kinds of things. And you don't really think about it until you either reread it or you even see a visual art piece, a movie or something like that done with it.
yeah, because it's all about interpretation.
Absolutely.
And it goes from your interpretation to someone else's interpretation. And that's what the best thing about literature is you can read it many different times in many different ways, and you will always find something different.
Yes.
And that is the true master of the art form.
Yes.
I mean, even when you look at paintings, photographs, whatever, you're seeing it through so many different eyes. And that's a surrealist idea, in my opinion, because even looking in a mirror, you may see the person, but is that truly the person you're seeing?
Exactly. And I know, like, whenever I go to an art museum, when I'm looking at different paintings, and like my husband and I have gone to some before, and he'll see one thing and I'll see another, and it invokes that memory, kind of going back of different things and how it applies to you. And it brings you into a surreal moment of the connections.
Exactly. I mean, it was like at the beginning of this month when we did our first Poe Unplugged, which, by the way, is coming up again Tuesday.
Yes, Tuesday, March 1st. We'll have that little short commercial here. March 1st, Tuesday.
Yes, we'll be talking about the Detective Dupin.
Yes, and that is 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Please go to www.the6degreesofpoe.com and sign up. We would love to have you.
Yes, we actually had a really great discussion.
We did.
With, unfortunately, it was just 3 of us, but that's okay.
Yes.
This is just a start. We're trying to build it up, but it was unusual at the same time. It was fantastical.
Yes.
Because we were all coming up with things and seeing different things when it came to the Raven.
Yes.
And that's one of the main points of surrealism, is what you see may not be the same as what someone else sees.
Exactly. So basically you're saying we had a surreal discussion.
We did.
Okay. I'll take
surreal.
it. Yes.
It was the real thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't think I've had enough coffee today.
Okay, that is totally okay. But yes, okay. So back to, we kind of digressed a few minutes, but back to the Greek mythology and tie-in and that kind of thing. But yeah, you mentioned earlier Psyche. I mean, just going back to that even.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the historical aspects of everything has a tie.
Yes.
And you have to know that the Greek literature, the Greek artistry, it had its own point of surrealism long before the surrealist movement in the early 1900s came about.
And that's a long time for it to come into fruition.
Yeah, because most of the time people think, well, being from an educational point of view, most of the Greek tie-ins is either from a literature manifest of the alliteration, the complexes, the different archetypes that came from that time period.
Right.
The early Greek tragedy. But then on the same side of that is the science and math portion that most people tie into Greek.
Very true.
You had the Eureka moment, and you've had Pythagoras. You've had all these, fantastical idea men that were bringing up things, because you have to think about, look at the pyramids of Egypt. How in the world could they have these huge pyramids at that time when you think about today, we have these huge skyscrapers, but if you look at it, there's all these cranes, all these electrical things, all these technology that's put into place. Back then, no, they were using a Pythagorean theorem to chip away and then pile things on top of each other. And
by hand.
Yes, by the hands of the slaves that they used, but that's also a part of history, And at that time, that was a surreal.
Yes.
That was a surreal idea of building these gigantic tombs, because all these pyramids were nothing but tombs. The Sphinx. You look at the Sphinx. That is a surreal thing.
Yes.
Because I've never seen something like that in real life.
No.
I'm not talking about the statue. I'm talking about just the idea of seeing.
Exactly, yes.
Half human, half, what was it? It's half, Sphinx is a half human, half lion, I think.
I believe so.
Yes. And because I always get them and the griffin mixed up.
Yes, I do too.
Because the griffin's actually 3 animals in one.
I believe so. Yeah, I get them mixed up as well.
But all those are just surreal in themselves.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes.
I mean, and we could even say that the imagination is surreal.
It is, because it, I'm sure that when you just brought up the Sphinx and the griffin, you had memories that you were thinking of, and I did as well, and I guarantee you they're not the same.
Nope, because no 2 people are ever the exact same.
Exactly. And we're bringing Schrodinger's cat in here too with this, if we're thinking about that experiment. Sorry to digress about that.
Hey, it's a cat. What can you say?
Exactly.
It's Freud.
Yes.
It's psycho. We're psychoanalyzing surrealism.
Yes.
That's the perfect thing.
Yeah, it is, because it's all the same thing.
Yeah, but history goes back that far, and then it's adapted and moved and changed with the changing of history, with the changing of the guard, basically. And then you got Poe. He's popped in here, and he's going, whoa, hello.
Exactly. And so many of his stories have those surrealist elements, and some of the themes that he used to kind of really bring out the surrealism, the whole death narrative in so many of his stories and poems. And then, am I saying it correctly? You had told me earlier, chiaroscura. And that is where light and shade in a drawing or a painting are brought out, and that's that surreal moment. Also, Poe used the impossible, like travel, the things that how you would travel or time travel, thinking about the optics and the optical illusions as well as metonymies. And that's where, like substituting different words for something that is, a real thing, and
Exactly.
but just kind of almost making it a slang term in a way, like you call a suit, a business person like a suit or something like that is kind of the example that I looked up.
It's pretty much using of our vernacular today.
Yes, and it's the art of using those words.
Yeah, and we can thank Shakespeare for introducing some of the words into our language we have now. Most people don't realize that the idioms and some of the cliches that we have and some of the words that we got were created by William Shakespeare himself.
Exactly. And if you just like Google some of the things that he came up with, I think you'd be surprised at some of the...
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then, of course, you have the specific themes that you were talking about from some of Edgar's plays.
Right.
Or not plays, poems.
Yes.
And
his
stories.
Works,
that you can definitely see the surrealist ideas coming out in the literature, even though before it was defined as surrealism.
Absolutely. I mean, just to kind of name a few, and the facts in the case of M. Valdemar, it also that story falls into science fiction, but it also falls into surrealism because you've got this, mesmerized patient who is a doctor himself, and he's in a surreal state while he's dead before he actually really dies. And so it's very surreal.
Yeah.
Another one is King Pest, when the main characters are sitting around drinking, ale and, what is beer now in the Undertaker's basement. You don't think about, it's like, would that happen today? Probably not, but you never know.
Yeah, you never know. That was a whole different time period, and most people would actually celebrate with the dead after they died in that time period.
Absolutely.
They would sit up with them. They would sit beside them. They would actually have portraits made with each other. That was just creepy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was creepy.
Oh, yeah. And another story, The Domain of Arnheim, where Poe is creating this, garden using landscape architecture, and it's fictional, but what he kind of did with it was the garden became an entity itself, and where the words about the garden were alive. If and it extremely surreal and very, I'm sure Freud could pick apart that bit by bit.
Yeah, and if you look at it, there's two people that I can just off the top of my head see for this garden. Number one would be Lewis Carroll.
Absolutely.
Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland, and her traipsing through the garden and falling through the rabbit hole would be something. And then, of course, Dali.
Yes.
And I believe that you said earlier that Dali actually created...
Yes, an enchanted garden. He went, let's see, I can't remember. He actually, when he came over, it was around 1940, he came to Virginia, and he was staying with some people about an hour outside of Richmond. And he and one of the people that he knew, it's believed, they don't have any proof, there was no signature for Dali visiting the Poe Museum in Richmond, but it's kind of believed that he possibly did, because after he heard Miller, the author, Henry Miller, who did sign the guest book, and this was a friend of Dali's, after he heard the description of Poe's Museum's Enchanted Garden, which is beautiful, by the way, and after seeing it for himself, again, they aren't 100% sure but he probably did visit with him. He created his own garden. He decorated the house where he was staying with all these beautiful things, flowers and plants and things, and he dubbed it the Enchanted Garden.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense because like we talked about not last episode, but the episode before last, where Charles Dickens actually met with Edgar Allan Poe.
Right.
And all that. So you would think that these types of artists, like Salvador Dali, would look towards people like Poe when you're in that area, because they had such a heavy influence and still showed a heavy influence, whether it be with the museum, whether it be with just the people around. But there has to be some kind of tie-in. You can't tell me there's no such thing as those kinds of coincidences.
Well, and if he is, friends with this author, it's like, during that time frame, he probably did go visit, especially because later on he does credit Edgar Allan Poe with helping him write his autobiography.
Yes.
And which is a very interesting story. Basically, that Poe visited him in like spectral form, and I'm trying to find my notes on this. It's very interesting.
Now, what better way to visit from Edgar Allan Poe is through a dream about him being dead?
Exactly. But basically, he would visit him in a convertible car spattered with ink. And he also said that, within these dreams that he had, and I guess he believed that he really did visit him, I guess, that
Dali
he made him a gift, and it was a black telephone that had black pieces of black noses of black dogs, and they were like held together with black strings, and a dead black rat and a black sock were in the phone, and they were all soaked in India ink. And so it's very out there.
It's very Poe-esque.
Yes, it's very Poe-esque, and I think, if Poe was going to haunt someone and help them write their own story,
Dali would be my choice, yes.
Dali would be a perfect person he would visit in this way.
Yes, he would, because I love Salvador Dali. He's one of my favorite artists.
Yes.
He was
Mine too.
A little special.
Uh-huh.
I think that's why I love him
so
much.
I agree.
Because The Persistence of Time is still one of my favorites.
Yes.
Beyond all.
It is. I used to have a print of that hanging up in my house.
Because every time, just the thought, I can automatically bring that picture up.
Yes.
And I can just hear the ticking of these clocks.
Yes.
And they're melting, and they're just fading away in certain areas, and they're just far off. You can, because you as well as I do, when you hear alarm clocks go off and you're in another part of the room, that distance, and it automatically triggers an idea inside of you. It's like, oh, what am I late for?
Exactly.
Oh, what am I missing? And so that's one of the things that always inspired me with The Persistence of Time.
And you even mentioned earlier when we were talking about this and kind of planning the show that, thinking about the time and the clocks and the ticking of the telltale heart beating.
Yes, because that in itself, because in that story alone, that beating of the heart was the equivalent of a ticking clock.
Yes.
He was on borrowed time because his conscience was driving him insane.
Yes, because he couldn't rationalize the guilt.
Exactly. And that rational thought was leaving, and there was not a real beating of a heart, but in his mind. And that is one of the major points of surrealism, is just the taking out of the mind that's not realistic. Yes. And creating it from a psycho point of view.
Exactly. And it's all very fascinating. And I mean, there's other places where Poe has that surrealism hints, and some are more forefront than others. One of the other stories I was thinking of was The Fall of the House of Usher. Thinking about the description and how detailed it is that Poe creates at the beginning and even in the end of that story of the house itself. If Dali had, I don't know if he read it or not, but I could so see him painting something surreal based on the description that Poe gave of the fall of House of Usher, and it would have been amazing.
Absolutely, because what's the best way of imitation is the best art form.
Yes.
And Dali taking the fall of House of Usher and putting it on canvas would have been the most perfect outlook for Edgar Allan Poe.
I think so. I definitely think so. And then another surrealist kind of view in The Mask of the Red Death, when you think about death walking among all the visitors, to the masquerade and things like that. It's very surreal to think that, you're going to this masquerade to avoid the Black Death, the Red Death, whatever you want to call it, back in that time frame. But yet the surrealness is death was right there.
Yeah, and it's really, okay, I'm going to bring this little creepy here.
That's okay. We're all about creepy.
In modern time, because we could think about that in today's pandemic.
Yes.
Because death walks among us. And even though we don't see it, we know it's there.
Exactly.
And it's not like it's any different than on a normal day, because we've had so many historical aspects come into play when we think about the Black Death. We think about the measles,
cholera,
smallpox,
polio.
Cholera. Yeah, polio. You think about the Spanish flu, the swine flu. I mean, there's been so many different things across the board, from history, from very first recorded history until today's time, that would pin Poe's Mask of the Red Death.
Absolutely.
Because we may put I'm not using pun here, I'm sorry. We may put a mask on it to try to hide it. Sorry.
So punny.
I know, sorry.
That's all right.
But you cannot hide from it.
No, and going forward into many years to come, many centuries to come, those things will still exist. Unfortunately,
Exactly.
Because that is life, and
and that's
disease exists.
exactly. It's like the plague is not gone. It's
Right.
still there, but we have developed the resources to combat it, so it's no longer a death sentence.
Right.
So, and that was surreal times. When Poe was writing this, the Red Death was surreal.
Yes.
It was a realistic idea, but everybody was walking around trying to avoid it at all
Right.
costs, and they thought they could hide. And it was just your imagination, because you can never really truly escape.
Exactly. And I think, with you bringing in kind of our recent pandemic, when the shutdown kind of stopped and we were going out, mask, no mask, depending on the situation,
Right.
and being around other people, it was, are they contagious? Are they not contagious? And again, putting that fear in your mind.
Yeah.
And
Are they vaccinated? Are they not vaccinated?
Yeah.
And even if vaccinations, they're still carriers. The one thing that I love to bring in from the history teacher part of me is Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary was a simple person. She never contracted typhoid,
Right.
but she was a carrier and was carrying it throughout and causing destruction in her wake because she was leading it.
Right.
So that's the thing. There's so many different aspects in literature and in history that have a realistic tie.
Absolutely.
But it's a surreal thought.
Yes, and I really think, kind of coming back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's quote, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." That is such a tenet in all of literature, especially with the horror genre, even surrealism and things like that, because the fear you avoid, the fear you want to get away from, is whatever you set in your imagination.
Yes, because the fear resides inside of us
Right.
first and foremost.
You decide.
Exactly. And it's when that fear is manifested inside your own psyche that it becomes an entity
Yes.
that you can't escape.
It becomes real.
Exactly. It becomes real. And it may be surreal to other people,
Right.
Because they won't have the same type of fear.
Exactly.
No,
and
and that's part of the reason that surrealism can manifest.
Exactly. And if it manifests too heavily for something that is imaginary, then the insanity comes in. And like many of Poe's characters, they go off the deep end.
Yeah, because they can't handle it.
Yes,
they
exactly.
cannot handle that, this fear has just become a reality.
Yes.
And it's only a reality in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
But their mind has driven them to the point to where they can't handle it.
Exactly.
And that was Poe's biggest literary tool, in my opinion.
I agree, yes.
Is he could write the insanity. And you could feel that fear. I mean, I keep coming back to Telltale Heart because it truly is one of my favorites.
Oh, me too. I love it.
Because your consciousness, and we can bring back to old Freud there, the id, the idiot, id, the superego, and the ego, that our own minds are our greatest creations.
Right.
And our greatest destruction.
Yes.
Because we can feed that fear. And that fear can become a entity that's living and breathing. And Poe was a master of doing that.
Absolutely.
Because he was living with his own fear in real life. So we're back. Sorry about that. That was a weird experience. We're talking about manifestation of things, and we're sitting here and we're recording, and Carmen's husband is at the door and it's locked, and he didn't know it, so he's rattling the doorknob, and we're all freaking out here, going,
We're
is
having
this real?
that creation of the entity in our minds of what is that noise?
The fear monger is like popped up there. But anyway,
yes.
So as continuing, well, that was like a realistic experiment there. We would very much have a psychoanalysis going on with if we had Freud and Dali, because I swear I think Dali was like, either he was smoking something.
Yes.
But, I mean, I love him to death because you have to love when those eccentric ideas.
Yes, yes.
Out there. I mean, Poe, I think of Poe the same way. And I think that's why he turned to alcohol, is because he couldn't handle his own ideas, his own, manifestation.
I think you're correct, and I think that was, the thoughts in his head, but also the things he was going through in everyday life, the horrors of reality of life.
Yeah, and this was his way of trying to deal with the reality. And most of the time he couldn't, because he had to create a fake reality.
Right.
Using alcohol. And even the writing was creating it in an aspect of trying to get away. Just like most people look at Dali. I mean, some of the artwork that he's done, I truly think that Freud would have had a field day with him, with some of his ideas. And then you've got the other ones that time period, the other surrealists, like Picasso. Picasso was another one of mine where he turned a reality of something that really happened into a painting, and you had to break it down. It was like a jigsaw puzzle that you had to put back together with your own thoughts and your own ideas,
right,
and your own mind, in order to make it a fulfilled moment. And so it would lead into other things. And Dali, their next degree is talking about the horror of it all. Yes. And one of the people that we love the most when it comes to horror type things is the good old Alfred Hitchcock.
Yes. And Hitchcock said it himself, how much of an influence that Poe had on him multiple times. And we were probably going to have a all Hitchcock episode down the road. But one of the ways that you can kind of tie in, not necessarily Poe here, but with Dali and Hitchcock, the movie Spellbound that has Gregory Peck and Ingrid Bergman, Hitchcock had Dali create a dream sequence with that surrealist art that Dali did so well, and it's awesome. And you can kind of, that came out, I can't remember, I could look up what year it came out, but it was before Vertigo. And if you think about Vertigo and the, animated kind of things that Hitchcock did with the falling and the
mesmerization,
the surrealism that Jimmy Stewart's character, put in his head with the fear of, heights and that kind of thing.
Oh, yes.
You can see where all of this ties in together.
Exactly. And you can connect it so well because if you think about the literary connection of Poe and Surrealism leading into the actual artistic movement of Surrealism with Dali's love of Poe, and then you have Poe and then Hitchcock, and then Hitchcock's love of Poe, Hitchcock and Dali working together. So there's all these connections. And one of the things that I love the most about these connections are these masterminds that are so talented.
Yes.
That you can connect them together. Because talent reaches for talent. Like goes to like. And I think that's one of the most mesmerizing.
Yes.
Of them
Bring
all.
in Dr. Mesmer.
Exactly. Dr. Mesmer, because to me, mesmerization is a surrealist idea also, because think of all the optical illusions.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
I mean, how many times have we sat there and just looked and you followed that dot and it's moving, but it's not. It looks like it's moving, but it's all in your mind.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, this was Salvador Dali. You look at the clocks, and if you stare at them long enough, you'll see that they're melting. Yes. In your mind, but they're not moving.
No, exactly. And, thinking about a modern connection of surrealism and tying in Poe, his poem, A Dream Within a Dream, that just the title of it alone, and that was the quote I read at the very beginning of the episode, all we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. And it's like, what is real? What is surreal? And if you think about it, if you've ever seen the movie Inception, what really is real throughout the movie and even at the end of the movie, I'm not going to give things away, but just thinking about what is real and what was surreal about the whole thing.
And I can throw in another one, The Matrix.
Yes.
That is a perfect, because even in the movie, if you even haven't seen it, most people know about Neo and the choice. Yes. The choice of the pill, and that's one of the things. What do we choose? Do we choose surreal or do we choose real? Exactly. Do we want to choose what's safe in our mind, or do we want to choose what we may not think is that safe?
Comfort, or are we going to have an adventure?
Exactly.
Risk.
Fear. It's all about that fear.
Yes.
And courage isn't the absence of fear. It is just overcoming that fear and doing the right thing anyway.
Yes, that's a great way to say it.
Yeah, so that's one of the things. Surrealism is always one of my favorites because you can tie it so much to literature, to art.
You can. And something that we were talking about earlier, so many Twilight Zone episodes. Oh, yes. Are just riddled with surrealism, and we're not going to give anything away. No. We probably will do a Twilight Zone dedicated to Poe. And also with Alfred Hitchcock. Several of their stories have so many Poe-esque themes in them, and I'm sure borrowings from people that wrote short stories of how these episodes were created.
Yes, and to bring it into what we're going to talk about next, is to tie in with the modern day horror that we equate. And I know many of us, we are just fascinated with the idea of ghosts with the horror story itself, because if you think about Stephen King, Stephen King was very much the big on, if he wasn't influenced by Poe, I don't know who would be.
I totally agree. And his writing is amazing.
Exactly. I mean, just his idea of the Tommy knockers. Tommy knockers, tapping on your door. Okay, sorry. It's kind of like the Freddy Krueger thing. You get it stuck in your head and you can't get it out. But Amityville horror is something that is realistic, but is still haunting today. Yes. So, because there's all these ghost stories about the horror of things that happened. And, you know, I've even read some things where people say that Poe is haunting, like when Dali said that Poe kept coming to his dreams. But there's even modern day ghost stories.
Absolutely. Well, we were looking up something to, like, we were looking for different things. We were researching for Poe connections, and there's a story in Delaware of him possibly haunting an inn or cemetery, and we're not going to go into all the details now, but, you know, I'm sure there are other places that Poe actually lived, went to, and those kinds of things where possibly they think that, you know, he is haunting.
Well, if you think about it, one of the ideas behind hauntings is that it's a place where someone has had something tragic happen to them. They haven't been able to move on, or their soul is still tied because there's unfinished business.
Exactly.
And if that doesn't describe Poe, I don't know what does.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just saying. But the horror story in itself, modern days, because we are all fascinated by the ghost story.
Yes, the unknown.
Yeah, the paranormal, the supernatural. Was a good first couple seasons, but we don't go into that. But anyway, so it is something. It's that unknown that we're all drawn to, just like with surrealism, just like with the idea of science fiction and fantasy and all that. It's something that brings and speaks to our most base need to know everything.
Yes.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is the horror story.
Yes.
And, the horror that Poe brought to us and how it ties into modern day.
And all the influences that have been from Edgar Allan Poe with horror.
Exactly. And as we see in every episode, there's a lot. And there's even more than that we're going to have special episodes to tie in with each degree later on, that we're going to center on, like specific writers, specific topics, those kinds of things. That will be our focus after we get finished with this 6 degrees.
Yes, and we have the 2 left. We have horror, and then after that, Poe places. Yes.
That he may haunt, he may not. We don't know.
That's right. That's right.
But we do want to bring in that once more, Poe Unplugged.
Yes.
This Tuesday. You can sign up. We're going to be talking about Dupin.
Yes, and on our website, the6degreesofpoe.com.
Exactly. You can also catch us on Twitter.
Yes.
With also the 6 Degrees of Poe. We now have an Etsy account.
Yes.
We have made these cool little stickers for our webcasts, and we're making a few more. They're going to have the artwork that we have on our Spotify.
Yes, for all the episodes. And there's the Poe head.
Exactly, the Poe head, which we're going to do a lot more with later on down the line.
Yes.
You can find our Etsy account with the 6 Degrees of Poe.
Yes.
Don't forget
And don't forget Facebook, the 6 Degrees of Poe. And that, I think, covers everywhere we are at this moment.
Yes, and so we hope that you will sign up and you will join us this Tuesday, March 1st at 6:30 Central Time.
Yes.
For our next Poe Unplugged.
Just read up on your C. Auguste Dupin.
Exactly. And with that, we would like to say once
we
more.
are Poe out.
Were I called on to define very briefly the term art, I should call it the reproduction of what the senses perceive in nature through the veil of the soul. The mere imitation, however accurate, of what is in nature entitles no man to the sacred name of artist.